Hey, I'm Shawn Powers, and I hate SELinux. Now, security enhanced Linux is not inherently a bad thing. It serves a good purpose, but it's convoluted and frustrating, and it breaks my first rule of security, and that is it's too hard to understand out of the get go. It should be simple. Now, it does come with sane defaults, and if you're on a Red Hat based system, you probably have SELinux enabled by default. And what SELinux does is it stops applications or processes from being able to access things on the system they shouldn't. The idea is if there's a compromise on your system, like let's say your web server is compromised, it isn't going to be able to have access to everything the www data user might have on your system. SELinux is going to keep it controlled to the very few things that it needs to have access to. So again, it serves a decent purpose, but it's so frustrating and so confusing, but you don't have to hate it. I'm just going to inform you about how it is, and then you can either join me in the dark side or love it. Either's fine. Now, the reason I'm covering it is because it is on the Linux Plus exam. And so all of these various things we're going to look at. And then in these command line utilities, we're going to cover the ones that have to do with SELinux. I'm not going to add AppArmor or anything else to this video. This is strictly going to be on SELinux, or Security Enhanced Linux. So we're going to cover all these things. I'm going to try my best to, but I'm going to show you how it works, how you can mess with it, how you might need to figure out how to fix something if it goes wrong, and how those things might go wrong. The best way I know to figure out how to do something is to just get right down and dirty with it. So we're going to be mostly on the command line in Rocky Linux, because again, Red Hat based systems are going to tend to be the ones that use SELinux. If you're on like an Ubuntu system, it's probably going to have AppArmor installed, which is kind of a similar idea, but different. So we're going to be looking at Red Hat stuff here. And again, we're using Rocky Linux 9. So first of all, how to enable or disable it, or even know if it's enabled on your system. And SELinux can exist in 3 different modes on your system. It can be enabled, it can be disabled, or it can be permissive. Now, first of all, let's look. Some of these commands require root, some don't. Like we can say SE status, and it will show us the current status of SELinux with a bunch of other things on our system. So the status is enabled. So it's enabled, which means that it is going to be able to be enforcing or not enforcing. So there's like it's like tiered, right? You can have it enabled or disabled. If it's disabled, everything's going to be ignored. It's as if it weren't installed on your system at all. If it's enabled, that means that Security Enhanced Linux is enabled, but it can either be enforcing or permissive. And the difference is, now you'll see here, the current mode is enforcing. And that means that if something breaks a rule, it won't allow that rule to be broken. And we can actually see the log files of things in the audit.log in the var log folder. That will show you like if something has been, if something broke the rules, it'll be logged in there. If this is not enforcing, if it's permissive, that means that it will record that something was amiss, but it's still going to let it happen. So a lot of times what you'll do is have your system in permissive mode, try it out, use it like you would normally use it, and then look in the logs to make sure that it didn't trigger anything that would have stopped it from working if it was in enforcing mode. Now we can change the mode in real time from enforcing to permissive by doing sudo set enforce permissive. And now we can either do the SE status again, and that will show us that now it's in permissive mode for our current mode, but we could also do just get enforcing, and it will just show, get enforce. And it will show us the current mode that it's in. So it says that it's in permissive mode, but you'll notice it said the mode from the config file is enforcing. So this is only real time. If we were to reboot the system, it would be back in enforcing mode. So if we wanted to make a permanent change from enforcing to permissive, that we wanted to persist on reboot, we would have to change the config file. And the only way to disable it or enable it if it is disabled is to change that config file and reboot the system, because SELinux is enabled as the system boots up. And so you can't just disable it in real time. You can set it to permissive mode in real time, but you can't disable it in real time. You have to change the config file and reboot the system. So you can, again, change it permissive and other stuff in the config file too. But just know the only way to change enabled and disabled is to do it in the config file and reboot. Now that config file, depending on the system, it's probably going to be in etc. SELinux, and you'll see in here we have semanage.conf, but config is the file that we would want to edit. So I'm going to say sudo vi config, and now this is where we can set it so that on boot it will be in whatever mode we want. So we can change this to, instead of enforcing, we could say one of these three up here, enforcing, permissive, or disabled. So if we wanted to completely disable it, we would have to set this to disabled and then reboot, save it, and then reboot the system. But we could also make it default to permissive, and then save it and reboot, and it would automatically go into permissive mode, which means that it would log problems, but it wouldn't stop anything from happening. Now, if you look down here, we're going to talk briefly about this later, but SELinux type, for the most part, targeted is what we're going to do on almost every system that we come in contact with, unless we need really high level security. Like the military that uses SELinux will often do this multi-level security protection. And that's where one of the contexts comes into play. I'll just talk about that. I know I'm foreshadowing here, but since we're in the config file, it can be either targeted, meaning it targets every individual like application or processes on the system. It can be minimum, which means it's slightly different than targeted policy. Only the things we specify are targeted, or are not targeted, are managed. And then MLS is multi-level security protection, which is the big boys. That's just things get really fine-grained in there. Like it doesn't even just say like, can a process access these files or not? It's like the process in this certain context might be able to access these, but not those. Like it's really, really high level. And those are the SELinux types. Generally, it's going to be targeted. That's the default. And I have never, ever changed it from targeted. So we're going to save that. Now, again, we could reboot and it would be permissive, but we already set it to permissive mode, and that's where it is. So what are all these contexts and stuff that I'm talking about? Well, that's the part that gets confusing. If you didn't think this was already confusing, let's go into, actually, let me see if we have a web browser installed first. Sudo apt install httpd, but I'm not on that kind of a system. Sudo dnf install httpd. Okay, it's already installed. So if we go into var www.html, this is going to be where the, well, there's nothing in here right now. So this is where the default place for our web home directory is, right? So if we're in here and I were to say sudo touch index.html, and then we do ls-l, we're going to see our normal permissions right there, right? So it's root. We probably don't want that. We probably want it to be ch own www data index.html. You can tell that I am a Debian user by default. It's not www data. It's ch own Apache index.html. And I have to be root to do that. So sudo. All right. And now if we do ls-l, okay, Apache owns it. It's there. However, there's another flag that you can do on ls. So ls-l and then capital Z is going to show us the label on the particular files. And the label shows us the various contexts for SELinux. So if I do that, we're going to see all sorts of stuff here. So first of all, this comes in 4 different fields. We have the user field here. This is the role field. This is the type field. And then this is the, what is it? Sensitivity. Sensitivity part only comes into play with MLS, with multi-level security. So we're not going to look at that. The ones that you're probably, if you're tested on any of them, they're going to be the type. This is what you're tested for in the very first RedHat certification too. So Linux Plus isn't going to go much further than that. And this is, so anyway, let's start. So the first part is the user, this labeled as an unconfined user. Now every user on a system is mapped to an SELinux user. Now, SELinux users are not the same as system users, and you can't just create an SELinux user. But every user on the system is mapped to a particular SELinux user. And so unconfined is like a catch-all kind of thing. So again, that's just how you can determine different SELinux users and how they're mapped with accounts on the system. Object, this is the role. The role of this is that it is an object. Roles are what a user or a daemon can, because like programs run as users, what they can do with a file or a device. This is an object. It gets confusing, and I'm not going to try to explain that much more than that. That is the role of this particular file, is that is an object that the Apache web server handles. This is the part that, again, we're going to manipulate more. This is the type of file. Now, a type of a file is what kind of object it is, right? So it's an object, that's its role. What kind of object is it? And in this case, it is the HTTP daemon system content, and then _t. This is just saying that it's a type. The _r says role, _u says user, and then this doesn't have an underscore because of course it doesn't. This just says that its sensitivity is 0. Again, that doesn't matter unless we're doing multi-level security, in which case that would be one more thing that could be tweaked for the web server. But in our case, the type is what is usually going to get messed up or broken on our system. And how it could commonly get messed up on a system. First of all, let's get a web browser going so we can test things. Okay, so there's a file in there. None of the context stuff has changed. And now if we go over here, can we hit localhost? Okay, so there. Now we have a web server going. We can read that and it says hello. All right. Now, if we go into, now I'm the root user. I switch to the root user. So I'll go to my home directory. And now if I were to create a file, so I'm going to say edit copy.html. And then I'm going to say insert heading 1, I was copied. And then vi move.html. I promise I'm going somewhere with this. I was moved. We'll save that. Now if we look here, ls-l, we'll see we have these two files, right? Both of these files we just created. If we do ls-lz, we're going to see they have contexts, but they are different than the ones in the web server location, which makes sense, right? That web server location is where the web server goes to get its files. And so if I created a file here, it's going to have a different type. Now, again, these are all the same: unconfined user, object R, but this part, admin home type. So this type of file, this file is of the type admin home, which means it should not work if it's put in a folder that is not admin home. That's what SELinux does. The reason that I did one called copy and one called move is because something sneaky happens, okay? Let's say we make a copy. So I'm going to say cp copy.html to var www html, press enter. And the other one I'm going to move. I'm going to say move the move file to var www.html. Okay, so if we do ls-lz, well, we only have the one file here left, right? Just copy, because I moved the other one. All right, so let's go back into there, var www.html, ls-l, we're going to see they're all here. Now, they are owned by root, but since they're readable, it should still, the web server should still be able to access it. And honestly, this will work exactly like you would expect. It'll just use as standard permissions, and as long as the web server has permissions to see the file, it'll work. But if we turn SELinux back into enforcing mode, that's where things get a little crazy because of that type context. So let's turn on SELinux and then see how these two different files work. All right, I'm root, so I'm going to say, first of all, get enforce, just to make sure that, yep, it's in permissive. So I'm going to say set enforce. And now I'm going to say enabled. Is that the, no, what do I do? Enforcing. Okay. Set enforce to enforcing. All right, and now if we do, well, we'll do SE status. We'll see it all now. We'll see, sure enough, current mode is enforcing. The mode from the config file, again, if we reboot, it'll be back in permissive mode. But right now, it's in enforcing mode. All right, so I'm going to clear the screen. Now, ls-l, here are our files. Copy is there. It has permissions so the web server can read it. This one has permissions so the web server can read it. So let's go over here and see if we can see the one that was copied. So copy.html, press enter. I was copied. Awesome. But now let's see move.html. Forbidden. You don't have access to the resource, but we should have access to the resource, right? It's in the right folder and the permissions are right. But that's where SELinux gets funny when it comes to moving or copying. Let's do ls minus L capital Z and see what's going on here. So the file that we copied, when you copy a file, so it's basically creating a new file in the location that is a copy of the file that you're copying. That's what copying means. When it puts it in the location, creating a new file, it inherits the context from the location that you're putting it to. So it got the correct type here, this content underscore T, because it was a newly created file because we copied it. So it has all the proper context that it needs in order to function inside that folder. But when we move a file, that original file is the file. And so it doesn't get a new context. It has admin home type still, even though it is not in the admin home. So the reason the web server says forbidden over here is because even though the regular Linux permissions are there so that it can access it, SELinux has stopped it from actually accessing that file. Now, if we put it back into permissive mode, it would be just fine. We would get a note in the audit log, but it would work just fine. Now, if we want this to work, because, let's say we moved the file into here, but that's the file that we want to be served out, we need to change this context. We need to change that to the proper one, which is http:/sys content. Now, there's two different ways that we can do that. There's a command called chcon, which means change context, and we can change the context of that file so that it matches. We basically have to say exactly what we want its context to be. Now, we know what it's supposed to be because there are other files in there. So we can use change.con to change the context. But we can also do a command called restore.con. And what restore.con does is it puts all the files in a location that you specify in the context that they're supposed to be. So if you have a file in there that you know is correct, and you want to make sure that it works and it has the proper context, but you don't want to have to type out the name of the context with change.con, you can use restore.con and it will look up the policies and say, okay, any file in var www.html should have this context, and it will label all of those files with the proper context. So again, whichever way you want to do it is fine. I'll show you both really quickly. All right, so ls-l, these are the files. The one we want to change the context for is move.html because that's the one that's messed up. So we can say chcon and then -t because that's the type that we want to change. Everything else is fine. It's unconfined user, object, role, but it needs to be a different type. So chcon-t for type, and we want it to be httpd_sys_content_t, the file move.html. Press enter, and now if we do ls-lz, we should see that it has the proper context now because we changed it using chcon. If we come over here, all of a sudden now, boom, we're able to see it because it has the proper context. Now I'm going to change it back so that we can see the other way to do it as well. So I'm going to say chcon-t, what was it before? admin_home_t, move.html. Now ls-lz, we're going to see, sure enough, now it has that incorrect context for the web server again. If we come over here, it's going to say forbidden. I don't have access to that. But let's say we had a bunch of them in here and we wanted to make sure that they all were just the proper context. We could just do restore.con move.html. And now if we do ls-lz, we should see it put it exactly where it was supposed to be. Now, the nice thing is, if we had all of them in here, we could also do restore-con-r star, and that's going to do recursive. Let's say we had folders and folders full of files that we moved, and so all the contexts were wrong. If we do restore-con-R for recursive, and then everything in the folder like star, it's going to go recursively fix the context for everything in this folder, and it's just going to work. Now, this is probably the best time to tell you, if you have a system where you've made all sorts of changes and you move things and you're positive the contexts are all messed up or they're all wrong, but you know that the system is in place like you want it. If you create an empty file, so you just touch a file at the root level of your system called auto label. So .auto label, all lowercase, all mushed together, and you restart your computer, that will basically run restore-con on your entire system. Okay, now you could boot it up and run restore-con -R//, it's going to go through, but then you're going to get errors about like the proc file system and stuff, which isn't really a file system, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, if you do that dot auto relabel, did I say label? Auto relabel, it will relabel everything and then delete itself. So that file will disappear and you'll know that it did it successfully. If you log back in the restarted computer and that dot auto relabel file is gone, you know that it did it and all the files should be fixed. But the reason I mention that now is because let's say you're on a system and you don't want to have the web folders in var www.html. Let's say you want to have them in a different spot. Well, the problem is policies are not set up for them to be in a different spot. Show you what I mean. All right, so I'm in the standard default folder, but let's say I am on the root level and I make a folder, so mkdir web. Okay, so if we look here now, there's a folder called web right there. I'm going to make the permissions, the permissions are probably fine. Let's see, ls-l, web, let's see, read, yeah. So everybody can read it, including the Apache web server. So if we go into the web server, or into the web folder, and we were to create a brand new file. So I'm going to say vi new.html. I am a brand new file. All right, so and then I'm going to save this. Now we can see in here that, again, it's readable by everybody, including the web server. So, you know, that the permissions aren't a problem. But if we do ls-lz, we're going to see that it's an unconfined, you know, these first two are the same, but this is the problem. Default _t. We need it to be web content because that is all the web server is able to see. Now, we could change con it, right? We could do ch con-t httpd, was it? What was the doggone it, what was the name of the context? There we go. So ch con-t httpd sys content _t new.html. And now if we do ls-lz, see, okay, this is now the correct format, but what if we do this? Restore con star everything. ls-lz. It's back to default. And that's because the policies say that the web folder is not where web files are stored. So if we want this to be a place that we can then change the Apache configuration so that it can read stuff out of here, we need to, one, change the Apache configuration. Not going to do that. You just go in there and change the web root. But we have to change how SELinux handles files that are created here or moved here or copied here or whatever to make sure that, or auto-relabeled, to make sure that the web server will always have the ability to do that. So what we can do is use SEmanage to create a new policy for files in this folder. And that, it is a little bit confusing, but basically we say SEmanage, and then fcontext is the command inside of here. So SEmanage fcontext to change the context of what, you know, the policy for this particular folder. -a, we want to add a definition or a policy. And then what policy do we want to add? Well, -t, we want the type to be httpd _sys _content _t. And then where do we want this policy to be in effect for? In this web folder, but also everything past there too. And that's where we have to use a little bit of regex, and it gets a little bit confusing. And I have to, if I have to do this, I have to Google it every time. But basically, web, open parentheses, / dot star, close parentheses, question mark, close quotes. And this is going to make the context for everything in this folder default to have the proper context so that when we create a file, it's going to have that. So I'll press enter. And now if we, let's see, what is it right now? I forget, LZ. So right now it's the default. So if we were to do restore con, now it should restore the new context, right? The new policy should be in place. So if we say restore con star, and then ls-lz, if I did it right, it changed it to the context that the web server can see. I hope that makes sense. I know that was a lot. I know, and I hate it, but it is kind of cool to understand what's going on, even if you don't really want to install it on your server. But there's one more thing we have to cover, and then we're done with SELinux, and that is Booleans. Booleans basically, I mean, you just know it's like true, false, 1, 0, yes, no. It's you turn things on and off. And while we can set policies for context, you know, the labels and the context on files and locations on the system, I didn't mention you can also do this with ports, which we're not going to touch on at all. But if you do netstat -Z, you'll see there's context for networking stuff too, but that's a whole different video. But with Booleans, there are settings that you can change on a system that aren't just like what files default context and stuff are. Booleans set up different rules on the system in general, and we'll continue to use the web server as an example. But Booleans are more settings that you can configure with SEManage, or I think, yes, with SEManage or set SE bool. I'll show you. Okay, so SEManage is how we did that, but let me clear the screen. You know what's going on here. We got that covered. If you do SEManage and then Boolean --list, it should show us all of the settings on the system. So all of these, and you can scroll up, there's a whole bunch of them. And it shows you here, if I can go to the very top, if I have enough. Yeah. It shows you what it currently is, the current state, and what the default is, right? So by default, you know, like this top one, abort anonymous write, the state is off, the default is off. Okay. So this shows you all of the settings. But if you want to change one, like for example, where is it? HTTP, this one. Okay. HTTP enable home DIRs. If you've ever been on a system that you have access to where you can put like your own little website, and it'll be like, usually at colleges where this happens, it'll be like the college server / your username, and then it will serve files out of your own user home directory. You can have like your own web page with that, you know, after the fact, it'll be like / your username. That's called home directories, like enable home directories in your Apache web server. It's a setting in Apache that you turn on, and then it will read them from that folder. But by default, you don't have access. SELinux says, no, the web server cannot look into users' folders. And so you have to change this Boolean. Even if you have the Apache server set up right and your web server and your users have the proper folder with the proper permissions, you still need to set this Boolean, or it won't work. Just like with that moved file that we had. So to change a Boolean, it's not difficult. You can do it in two different ways. Using SEManage, so I'm root, so SEManage, Boolean, instead of list, we'll say modify, and we'll turn it on. And what was in it? It's HTTPD enable home DIRs. All right, so I press enter, it's going to make the changes to the policy. And now if we list it again, and I'm just going to grep for home dir. Looks like there's a bunch of them, but HTTPD enable home DIRs is now on, even though by default, by default it's on too. Well, doggone it. Okay, but we've turned that on to make sure it's on. Was it on by default? Let me go up here. Oh, no. Okay, so it was off, and it off by default. Okay, so because I used SEManage and I changed it, what that means is when we reboot, it's actually going to stay on. So it's like you can change it using a different tool. We can change it in real time, just like with the other one with ChangeCon, we could do it. We could change it in real time using set SE bool HTTPD enable home DIRs. I'll say 1 for enable it, and we could say 0 to disable it. And now if we do the grep thing, we're going to see that it's off. But by default, it's on because we set the default when we use that SEManage command. But you can also set the default with set bool. You just have to add a flag. So you can say set dual or set SE bool -P for make it permanent. Enable home directory 0 for off, or we could say off. I think we can say off too. We don't have to say 0. We could say off. And now if we do that grep thing, we'll see that sure enough, we have done it. It's turned off and the default is off, but I want it on. And so if we do it this way, but say on, This is going to not only change it in real time, but also make it permanent, just like we did with that SE manage. One last time. HTTP enable on and on. Hopefully that makes sense. And I think that is everything when it comes to SELinux. You know how Booleans work. You know that just like with system CTL and services, like being on and being enabled by like system boot are different. So you have to make sure whether you're like when we change the context, it will change it for a file, but then if it is relabeled or like we restore con, it'll put it back to where it's supposed to be unless we make it a permanent change using SE manage, like on a folder, or SE manage on the Boolean, or set SE bool with the -P to make that permanent. We can make those changes. But if you have a problem where the permissions seem like they're correct, but all of a sudden you're just getting like access denied or forbidden, check SELinux, see if it's enabled and being enforced. And if it is, that might be the problem when you're trying to configure something on your system. I still hate SELinux. I do. But I hate it understanding what it is and why it is what it is for the most part. Some of it's confusing. A lot of it's confusing. But make up your own mind whether you like it or don't like it. It doesn't matter. Now you understand it. And so when you're asked about it, you'll be able to answer those questions. Learn everything. Do what you love, and most importantly, be kind. Thank you so much for sticking with me all this time. I have no idea how long this video is going to be, but yeah, now we're done with it.